So just a note here about how you can update the firmware on the Haasoscope Pro, which I'm kind of proud about. Of course, it's got JTAG, so if you know what you're doing with Quartus and the Altera FPGA tools, you can upload the firmware using a USB blaster and the Altera software. And there are some instructions about that in the Haasoscope Pro firmware directory for the firmware experts out there. And that's how it's programmed the first time. But then afterwards, you can upload new firmware straight from the Haasoscope Pro QT software. So all you do there is you go to File, Update Firmware, and it says it's thinking about updating the firmware on board 0, which is good, and it's giving me a confirmation box to make sure that I really want to do this. So it's made sure that the file is really there, and before we erase the old firmware, and this is the file that it has found. So it looks for this file in ADC board firmware output files coincidence auto.rpd. So as long as that file is there, then it finds it, and it's going to be able to update the firmware. I started this software in kind of the normal Python way, so I have the whole Git repository here in the Haasoscope Pro directory, and I'm in the software directory, and I have Python installed with all the Python libraries I need, and then I can just run Python Haasoscope Pro qt.py. So that's like the full way of running the GUI, not just clicking on the executable. Really only makes sense you're going to update the firmware if you also have the Git repository and you've been able to, download the latest firmware that comes in the Git repository. So you want to do like a git pull, get the latest firmware, which will be in this firmware output files directory, and then when you do this update firmware thing, it will upload the latest firmware to the board, or at least that's the idea. If you hit OK here, then it's going to go ahead and update the firmware. So why not? It actually turns off the external clock output because that can add some noise, which messes up the firmware writing occasionally. So just to be safe, we do that, and then it erases the flash, and then it starts writing the new firmware to the flash chip on the board, and it takes about a minute or so to do. And now we're almost done. So it took about a minute, and there we go. It wrote all the bytes that it needed to, and then it's going to verify the write. So it reads back each of these blocks of flash, and it compares it to what it was supposed to write, and it makes sure that the right thing is on the board. If it's not, which should never happen, of course, but if for some reason the verify failed or something like that, you would probably want to try uploading the firmware again before turning it off, because you now have no good firmware on the board. So you would need to go back to the JTAG if you really bricked it and failed. But I've never seen it not verify. So but it just checks. So you want to check that this verify goes okay, and then you've got the latest firmware on the board. To actually run the new firmware, you've got to either open up the case and press a little reset button inside, which you're not going to do. That was more for debugging in the old days. But you just unplug it and plug it back in, and when it turns on, it loads up its firmware from Flash, so you'll be running the latest one. So there you go, and looks like it was verified. Turns the output clock back on. Well, it wasn't on anyways because we only have one board here. And you're done, and it'll start running again. Still running the old firmware, but now if we unplug it, plug it back in, it'll be running the newer firmware. If you want to know what firmware version you're running, that is printed out towards the beginning somewhere. Yeah, so it says it's running firmware version 26. And so any board that's detected, it'll check the firmware version of the board and print it out when you're starting up. All right, that's it.